Hello and welcome to The Green Stream, a podcast brought to you by Sustainable Business Network Detroit, a network of partnerships between Southeast Michigan stakeholders, innovators, and changemakers. Each partner is on a mission to advance and amplify sustainable business practices, and we're here to learn from, share, and help activate a sustainable way forward for Greater Detroit. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And head over to our website, sbn-detroit.org. Now, let's listen in to our conversation with today's sustainability leaders.
Well, hello and welcome to the Green Stream. Thank you for joining us today because we have a really exciting guest. I'm Terry Barclay. I'm the president and CEO of Inforum and the chair of the Sustainable Business Network of Detroit. But our guest today is Nia Batts. And Nia, when we first had the opportunity to talk to you, I was like, oh my gosh, you've got such an incredible background. It's hard to know where to start. And I know we've got only one thing to focus on today. But let me just say a few things and you might want to, comment on them. So you're certainly known for co-founding Detroit Blows, your philanthropic leadership with Detroit Grows, and your strategic advisory role at First Women's Bank. All of those things reflect your commitment, your deep commitment and interest in entrepreneurism and supporting entrepreneurs in their journey. But you are a former entertainment executive, most recently serving as the head of strategic partnerships and social innovation at Viacom CBS, which of course we know is now Paramount. And, clearly your experience as a corporate executive and entrepreneur and investor are of interest to us today. But I just have to talk a little bit, and I hope you can say just a few words about this, because alongside with Sophia Bush, Billie Jean King, Allison Felix, and Wes Felix, you serve as a strategic advisor to First Women's Bank, which is a first of its kind, purpose-driven bank with a mission to grow the economy and advance the role of women in it, something that's near and dear to my heart with our work at Inforum, accelerating the careers of women. So even though we're here to talk about another part of your life, I hope you'll, be able to say a few words about that. But let me just say you're also an independent director with Surge AI. You serve on the advisory board of the Michigan Founders Fund. You're a founding member of the board of directors of Birth Detroit. You're an executive committee member and board member for the Boys and Girls Club in Southeastern Michigan. And before we went live, we were just sharing our mutual volunteer commitment to Cranbrook, and you're involved with the Cranbrook Art Museum and its Detroit collection, which is phenomenal. So you also have an impressive list of academic credentials: BA Columbia, Executive Ed Studies at Harvard, UC Berkeley, NYU, MBA, UC Berkeley. I mean, it just kind of goes on and on. But we're here to so maybe you want to just say a few words about that before we get started on our main topic.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me. And yes, when I when I hear you reference all of those things, it kind of sounds like a lot. It sounds very diverse, but I think for me, I've always just been kind of following the story and learning from the experience in front of me and determining how that kind of informs the pathway forward. All of that you said is absolutely true. The one thing I would mention is that I didn't actually finish my MBA at Berkeley. I took a pause when I had the baby. And so I think what looms over me is, shall I return? And the advice from my father and the team was, raise the fund and you can go back later, raise the fund, do some research, figure out something later. So it's something that I think about, but I think it always was just sort of rooted in this this quest for knowledge and being curious, which, my parents taught me is sort of one of the most important things that you can be. You mentioned that I was an entertainment and media executive at Viacom CBS, Paramount, maybe Skydance, like we'll figure out sort of when this comes out. There's been a lot of consolidation in the media and entertainment industry. But what was most exciting for me was my purview into our corporate social responsibility work that we did. And, we had 4 areas of focus and, citizenship, health and wellness, education, and the environment. And so that provided like a really sort of robust opportunity for me to understand the nuances of concerns for our audiences, which were across 22 linear cable television networks in 160 countries and territories. And really what you find is the issues are the same. People care about, their families. They care about being able to, have some economic prosperity so that, they can not only support their families, but enjoy their lives. They care about the water they drink and the air that they breathe. And so all of this helps to inform the work that we did as a larger corporation, but also the specific initiatives across all those cable television networks, whether it's Nickelodeon or BET or, MTV, and, some have come and gone, but the core of those audiences, and especially when I was there, was this focus on millennials. Now I'm an elder millennial at 40, but what you really started to see was this generational shift and passion for making the world better. And the question always was, can you do well and do good? And that was sort of the beginning of those types of conversations and that type of language and framework. And I've really just sort of followed that pathway. And it's interesting that it's had some kind of twists and turns. But when I look back, it all feels relevant. And it all feels incredibly like helpful in terms of how it formed my worldview. And at this juncture, my investment focus.
Wow. That was actually one of the things, and I really want to get into Union Heritage Ventures, because that's really what we want to talk about today. Although, as you said, we could go in any of these other directions and have a really interesting conversation. But Nia, at what point, so you've talked about your broad background in following the thread. I'm always just curious about, was there anything else? Was there another point where you realized that the best way to fulfill sort of a well-rounded business mission comes down to investing in sustainability-focused investments? Was there another point where you came to that realization, or maybe experiences that you had?
Well, I think it came early because what I realized when I was at Viacom was there was this strong desire from the market to monetize this demographic of people who cared about different things than the market expected. And so you started to see the response from big, Fortune 500 companies that were advertisers on our platform that wanted to reach these audiences, that wanted to send sincere and authentic messages, and their messaging and then what they were messaging. So their products, like their content, everything had to shift because of the power of this audience. And that continues to be the case with youth culture and that kind of, whether it's 12 to 24, 18 to 36 kind of demographics, wherever you want to sort of, take that band, that more so, and every year we find that the youth care about their role in the world, their impact in the world, their footprint, quality and efficiency, like the story. So all of these things, I think, were really impactful in my understanding that there was a significant amount of value that was in this way of doing business. And I started to see that with the shift from advertisers. And that really sort of continued forward. It was maybe like a slightly more kind of contrarian viewpoint, one shared by many, but I think just relative to what the dominant, predominant perspective of the day was, which is you can do well by doing good, and we have to be good stewards of, the environment, the communities that we live in, because that's what's going to ultimately lead to our longevity, to our happiness, to our economic prosperity. And so I think that those beliefs were just really intrinsically kind of rooted in me, like certainly from my family and growing up in a culture of service and putting food in the ground, like we put we garden and harvest, and my aunt always sending boxes to our family. And I think that that's really an important tradition, like to have that type of connectivity to the earth. And so I think there's like a personal experience and one that also was informed by my professional experience. But I can't really say that there was a specific moment. It was more so I could start to see the tides changing, as did many sort of, other investors that are, more well versed in this space than even kind of we are starting out. But you're asking about Union Heritage Ventures, which is it's an additional line of business from the firm that my dad initially founded 35 years ago. And the name Union Heritage, Union is an homage to my grandparents who were all in unions, and we primarily manage union pension funds, or that is how the business started. And heritage is about sort of its legacy, its family, its community. And what we have always believed, and what my dad has sort of instilled at the company, is behind the numbers are people. And we have to make sure that we are, providing for the future success of those people. And in the public markets, you do that with, your investment in publicly traded securities. We're value investors. And so we're always trying to figure out, as early as we can, if companies are going to be successful, because the longevity, the value that you're able to generate over an extended period of time are the pensions that go back to those families. And so we are not a firm that's really ever disconnected from what we do. We always say, like, we work obviously for our investors, but like we work for the people. The people are our investors. And as we added a line of business and venture capital, which came after sort of a brief sojourn to Morgan Stanley, and then we decided to take the company back private again at the end of 2020. And we had the opportunity for the first time to really think about what a private market investment strategy would look like to be institutionalized and as a companion to the main firm. We have been angel investing for 10, probably 12 years at this point amongst our 4 general partners. So me, my father, Derek Batts, my uncle Louis Carr, who's retiring this year, I think, as the president of media sales at Black Entertainment Television Group. And so that's a really, important sort of research organization also, in terms of understanding, especially for communities of color, what is important to them and what sort of impediments they feel are impacting like their quality of life. And so we're very oriented in those conversations. And then, Sophia has been an actress, or an activist rather, longer than she's really even been an actress. When I met her, she was an actress, but at a social impact conference where we were talking about climate and the environment. And so I think what's helpful for us is this doesn't really feel like something new we're doing. It feels like something we now have the opportunity in the sort of construct of Union Heritage Ventures to really aggregate and systematize. And so that has led to the establishment of, a series of funds, the first to invest primarily here in Michigan. But for our early stage fund, we had to really think about what are those areas of focus that we want to be invested in. And we had to go through, a pretty substantive process to be able to not just sort of defend the thesis for that early stage, but really develop a viewpoint of how we saw the connectivity in this ecosystem and the role that we thought we could actually play.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, first of all, thank you and congratulations on this work, which I know is constantly evolving, but we certainly need people with your experience and passion and long-term commitment. What an impressive story. We're glad you're doing this work, Nia. It's really wonderful. I am curious about, as obviously a majority African American and women-owned venture capital firm that's headquartered right here in Michigan. And, have you thought about how minority communities are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change? Is that something that informs your investment? And that becomes sort of a cycle where it exacerbates existing racial gaps. What's your approach to this reality in the Detroit market?
Mhm.
How do you think about it?
Yeah, well, I go back to sort of on the investment side saying that we're value investors and we think that there's a tremendous amount of value to be generated by underrepresented founders who are solving problems for underrepresented communities. It's not a filter for investment for us, but I do think that that worldview is an important one because it allows us to find talent and to support ideas that maybe other investors aren't looking to solve or support. And I think that that's really a part of our strategy that makes us competitive. Yeah, so we're headquartered in Detroit. And I've always lived in a city, or Detroit, or New York, or Los Angeles, and the your exposure to natural resources is somewhat confined when you're in major cities, and Michigan is such a beautiful state, so we have the ability to take a very short trip and to have access to so many incredible natural resources. But your question is a good one when I think about even the city of Detroit, and it kind of reminds me of a founder that we have invested in, Darren Riley from Just Air, an incredible company. And, he tells the story about how we take 20,000 breaths every day and how important the quality of our air is and how that impacts, not only our physical well-being, our emotional well-being, but what I loved about this company is that it's very data driven. And I'm someone, I think really our entire team is really impacted by the data because the data doesn't lie, but the data also tells a story. And often the air quality data, water data, all the environmental data in, cities, especially in areas where you have, communities of color, where you might have more socially economically disadvantaged communities, you find that the air quality, the water, everything seems to be a little worse. And when you take a step back, you realize, okay, well, is this the case because these communities are under-resourced, or is this the case because there are systems and structures that have put in place that have allowed the lack of resources, the negative impact to be controlled and aggregated in certain areas to protect others, right? And that's often, a familiar refrain, across the country, across a variety of different sort of economic factors and indicators. And what Just Air has done is they have created what essentially is it's a data company, right? Like they do have physical monitors that they have installed. And in fact, in Wayne County, the largest air quality monitoring pilot of its kind is here in Wayne County and run by Just Air. But also what they're able to do is take all of the data and insights from these monitors and help the county create next best actions, but also empower the citizens with that information in real time so that they can make decisions. They have also, even begun pilots with inhalers where they're able to get data to determine how often asthmatics are having to use their inhalers during the course of the day and how that relates to the air quality. So then you start to get some really nuanced data that's important for citizens, for municipalities, for health systems. You have to figure out the raison d'etre, right, for different groups. For a healthcare system, I think it's really important for them to have this data because part of what they're also trying to do is figure out how you can sort of drive costs out of care. And if we can think about the delivery of basic resources, or really not compromising those resources for communities, what we're finding is that is an area of investment that we think is providing a tremendous amount of value to the community, but is also a scalable solution that if we can do here in Detroit or in Wayne County or in Michigan, that we can, scale across the country. And we have a lot of, really great companies, some that we're invested in, some others that we're looking at that are incredibly exciting and also are solving like real problems for people in the community.
What's so exciting is how you're looking at this holistically. I mean, we've had other guests on the podcast and, that we've covered in our newsletter articles and other things that have talked about the health connections, and just you have to look at these issues in a holistic way. I've heard healthcare executives say that one of the best things that they could do to control costs is better nutrition, for example. And so, certainly better air
Yes.
is right up there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we have like a CHIO maternal health and nutrition company that also is like focused on sort of the data and insights and how to do exactly that, right? Healthier moms, healthier birthing people is going to create just a healthier environment, right? And also drive some of the costs, out of providing care. But I love what you said about the overlap, because for our early stage fund, we had to really think, where are these 4 areas of focus for us? And, it's climate tech and clean energy, mobility, but we really think about the future of mobility, healthcare, and advanced manufacturing. I think where we become the most excited is when we can start to see some sort of points of connection and points of intersection between these areas. And, we're seeing that, and we're seeing it here in Michigan because we're really drilling down and looking not just in these 4 areas, but like, where is that overlap? And so when we start to think about, advanced manufacturing, we think about the future of factory and farm. And so we obviously, want to make sure that there's better efficiency, there's quality that obviously will drive revenue as well. But we also prioritize people. It's interesting because AI is obviously this conversation that kind of really spans any industry at the moment. But when we look at it, and whether it's on farms or in factories, and what we always say is like, this first wave is not going to be AI and robots like taking everybody's jobs. It is going to provide an opportunity for the humans, the people that understand how to utilize this technology to be more efficient, to have better quality products, and, to grow their businesses. And so we think about how we can also begin to look for and invest in those types of innovation and technological solutions that, allow the data to be better so that the decisions are better, and so that the people are armed with better information and resources to grow food that's important for us, to make products that, we use. And, to think about not just making products, but how to reuse old ones to create new ones. And so then you start to think about like the circular economy and what that means relative to advanced manufacturing. And so it all becomes connected for us. And I think that's the really exciting part of it. Like when you find a company and you think, I knew someone had to have been thinking about doing it this way. And it inspires joy, like true, genuine joy. And then you want to figure out, is there something that we could do to support this company? Sometimes it's capital. Sometimes most of the time, if it is capital, it's also, a suite of resources and relationships that we feel like we can also bring to bear. And sometimes there's companies that are not right either for the construction of our portfolio for us to invest in, but we spend time telling, their stories and trying to make connections and even evangelizing the ones that we haven't invested in yet. Like there's a company, Mott.
I'm sorry, what was it?
It's called Mott. Okay. They have created these autonomous robots that can go down into the pipes, into our water systems, and help get sort of better data. And that's just incredible to me. It's like, if we had had something like that in Flint, a decade or so ago, kind of where would we be? So these are the types of like innovations that are happening here in Michigan that are also, scalable solutions, and that we should be, doing everywhere. And so we think about air, we think about food, we think about we think about water. Inspired Solutions is another Michigan-based company out of Michigan State University, and they're working on the removal of PFAS from water. Like, so these forever chemicals that are compromising our water systems, and the ability to essentially be able to remove them. Like, these are important innovations that are going to affect the quality of lives for generations, because we've done this damage and now it is we have the opportunity to correct it. And yes, there is an economic value in being a part of those solutions. But what's even more important is that we do it, because we have finite resources here. We don't act like it.
Well, we have finite resources and we have finite time. I
Yeah.
mean, clock's ticking.
Yeah.
Solving this stuff,
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to interrupt your flow.
No. I mean, yeah. I think about that too, right? It's the urgency, and we think about that as early stage investors. And I think part of what makes me anxious sometimes is we don't have as much investment at the earliest stages in these types of companies that we need. And that is, it's kind of like a Michigan problem, because you can see in other investment ecosystems where there's lots more activity from, angel investors and early stage investors that are making sure that as quickly as possible, these companies can hit their milestones so that they can continue to raise capital and grow, and grow the companies, but, really raise successive rounds that allow the scale to happen efficiently and more quickly. And, what you'll find, and, one of our investors, Doug Song, who founded Duo Security, so very much kind of the gold standard of a Michigan-based founder, and especially, he had a SaaS company. What he says is that, we had to be able to fail early and often. Like, you have to be able to do that, because the speed at which you can move is also helps to dictate your future success. And so from an investor, I think that's why we made the decision, even though we're pre-seed to A, just generally speaking, as a firm, our early stage fund is really allowing us to take these more concentrated bets in these 4 areas of focus really early, and hopefully these companies meet their milestones and we can continue to grow with them, so that we can ensure that they have, a continuous sort of ability to raise capital, and to do it here in Michigan, so that we don't build these great companies here and then they have to leave and go other places because we don't have the ability to support them. We have to support them, evangelize them, use them, make these introductions as early as we can, so that they have a chance of achieving that scale.
Oh, absolutely. And the fail fast mantra is something that we say, and I still think it's something we're not good at. We have this need to talk about, the companies that are successes. And, I know that I spent a little bit of time out west sort of supporting entrepreneurs, and it's such a different culture, different way of talking. People talk about failures as a badge of honor. It's not just your success as a badge of honor. And it's great to hear investors like you supporting that, and understanding why it's important. That really matters.
Yeah. Another thing, kind of adage that Doug uses a lot, is that innovation requires failure, and it absolutely does.
Yeah.
And I also think that, when you look at some of these other ecosystems, I guess like the Bay, in particular, what you have is a lot of really seasoned entrepreneurs, like serial entrepreneurs who have failed and have rebuilt new companies. Like they learn in every sort of iteration of these businesses, and it makes them often better founders. You also have investors, who have made some investments that have done well, but they're still conditioned to the risk and understand that you have to take some. And, that is something that we're working on here in Michigan, like making sure that our founders have the ability sometimes to fail, even at the company that, they're running now. And we have founders where their first, companies didn't work, but we knew they were great founders and we invested in those founders down the line. But until we become conditioned to this idea of like risk and failure, both investors and entrepreneurs, it's going to stifle our innovation ecosystem at a time when we really can't afford to.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Nia, I would like to ask you a little bit about your view of farming and food production,
Mhm.
because we've touched on that a little bit already.
Mhm.
But when you think about industries that are particularly exposed to climate change and the impacts of that, agriculture and food production are sort of top of mind. And I've always thought that maybe there were opportunities for us here in Michigan in that regard when
Mhm.
we see the impacts in other parts of the country. But I wonder if there are technologies that can help optimize agricultural processes. You kind of touched on that. Are there examples of that or ways you're thinking about that we could benefit from? It seems like there's such a renaissance in urban farming and
Yeah.
other kinds of agriculture. What points of hope are there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've got, an incredible program at Michigan State University where they're really focused on sort of the development and innovation of the agricultural industry, across the country, but certainly, here in Michigan. And we're looking forward to kind of deepening our relationships there. I would say that this is a newer space for us, but where we continue to become interested is, can we get better data to drive more efficiency? There's some things we can't control, right? Like this broader story of climate change is something that we unfortunately are now in a position where we have to react to. We've sort of, not sort of, we have or are missing every kind of major kind of international milestone that has been set out, and we are in a unfortunate situation, currently in America, where we, really have a U.S. president that doesn't really believe that, that the trends that the data are showing are actually having, an impact on our climate and in our communities and our ability to be able to grow food efficiently. Um, and so that's a challenge. So we have to figure out how we can be more efficient with what we have, certainly. I am interested in different types of farming practices like vertical farming. And, the one thing we've always had here in Michigan is space. And then when I think about Detroit, another thing we have is just a lot of like large manufacturing structures that have been used for various parts of, the automotive industry over the years. And so I do hope to see kind of more of the intersection of that type of like commercial farming, but I don't think it can be at the expense of like a traditional sort of, agricultural farming practices as well. I think we have to figure out how to use the data to be more efficient to react to the conditions that we can't control.
Yeah.
So I've become interested in like the data, the software, like the real practical tools that, just as we're trying to think about reindustrialization from a more traditional kind of advanced manufacturing standpoint, that we're thinking about how that technology can be used to, enhance our food systems as well.
Yeah. So to some of those points, and maybe you've already covered this in some ways, but Detroit is developing so rapidly, and your focus is in large part on this market. How do you approach or think about investments in the built environment, especially in terms of investing in construction, engineering, and industrial services?
Hmm. Yeah. We know that we have to use better, more efficient building materials because we have a housing crisis. So that's something that we, in a lot of different industries and investors, have to contend with. Also, Detroit obviously has a really beautiful kind of architectural legacy, and then also, some of the remediation that has to be done when you go into these, into these buildings is concerning as well. So what I would say is, I'm much more interested from a use of space standpoint about how we can efficiently and sustainably like build new housing. And there was a founder that I was talking to a couple of weeks ago who was saying we talk about all these 3D printing and sort of manufacturing, and really what we need to be doing is like more efficiently digging foundations. And so his company is sort of doing that. I won't speak too much about it. I think they're in the patent process right now, but these are solutions where you're talking about driving the costs out of construction, and also creating efficiency that is going to allow you to build in different ways. And so it's like, should we be 3D printing homes, or should we be using big facilities to create prefab manufactured homes with sustainable materials? And can we start doing higher quality, energy efficient infill? That becomes, I think, more interesting to me. I'm sort of tangential to to housing and development, and that traditionally has not been a place where we've invested as a firm. My father has some investments outside of the firm that are more kind of in the real estate and development space, but that's where I would be interested, because that feels like a uniquely Detroit, Michigan kind of solution, because the thing that we have here is space. And we know that Detroit and across the state and really across the country, we know that we have a housing crisis, and part of that is the affordability of the housing. And so we've got to figure out a way that people can afford homes. We've got to figure out a way that we can build, new homes with materials that are going to kind of withstand the test of time in terms of what the financial costs and considerations are of the people that are living there as well. And so that goes back to kind of how can we be more energy efficient, on these footprints, so that we can continue to keep the costs down for like working families. And so again, it's one of those things. It's like, that's my brain. It's like, it's all connected.
It is.
And so these are areas that we're starting to explore, and we are starting to see, a couple of companies in the sort of advanced construction space, I would say, here in Detroit that we're excited about. And hopefully I can talk about that later after they're fully fully completed.
Okay, well, we'll take you up on that. We're going to have you come back and talk about that. But are there any other, you've mentioned Just Air and some other examples of things that you can't quite talk about yet that are exciting that you've seen, but are there, when you think about trends, what are some of the most exciting trends or technologies that you're seeing in sustainability right now? Anything additional to mention?
Let's see, trends in sustainability. I mean, I think maybe I already said it, but the part that has been interesting to me is that everybody is so afraid of AI, and I'm trying to remember sort of where this research came from, and I can send it to you after. But this was a study done from manufacturing companies, and 95% of the companies said that they actually were going to increase their workforce because they were getting better data from AI that was helping them figure out ways to be more efficient in their footprints. And it actually was not, we're going to fire a bunch of people. It was that we need more people that understand these technologies, or we've developed some insights that have informed an operational strategy, and we know best where to put humans and how they can be supportive of these processes. And so it's so, I think it's a little counterintuitive. Again, there's this like dominant narrative that AI is coming to take everybody's jobs, and it's going to take some people's jobs. But the interesting part of that was that a lot of these companies feel like they're actually going to grow their workforce. And I think that is very different than what people think. It, to me, underlies the importance of upskilling and retraining. That's something that we really have to think about here is, we've traditionally been like this manufacturing based economy, and we have to figure out how people are going to be prepared for the jobs of the future that are already working. And we have to think about how our youth that are coming up, through middle school and high school now, or going into any sort of, post-secondary education or skills-based training programs, are going to be prepared for those jobs. And so I think it's not something that we can run from, but we do have to think, what is the future that we want to build? What kind of community do we want to live in? And make sure not only that we have entrepreneurs, that we can hopefully invest in, that are solving those problems, but that we also are thinking about the future workforce that can help to build those companies as well.
And how do we, and also how do we create that vision, especially so that our young people have a through line? It's like you grow up knowing what's around you, and we need to create that vision of the future, that knowing what might be possible for a career, because it may be different than things that you see right now, but every bit as attainable and as exciting as anything that you've thought of currently. So how can they prepare, pardon me, for those opportunities? I think we have a lot of exciting stuff ahead of us. So Nia, I have just sort of one last question for you. We like to leave our guests with um, maybe a practical step that they can take. Is there something that you would recommend to our audience, you know, a way of thinking or a practical step that they could take to contribute to sustainable business practices, empowering them to make a difference within their sphere of influence?
Mhm. I think sometimes people at companies feel like it's hard to make these types of shifts. I think people need to talk to each other. It's, how did you begin to use an AI tool like at your manufacturing based facility? Like, talk to someone that has done it, because that makes it feel more real than me saying everybody should look into this or you should do this. It's like people need real world examples. And so I think the leadership really needs to come from the community to say, like, here are the stories. I was on a call earlier today about kind of the innovation ecosystem here in Michigan, and like how we can tell all the great stories from our R1 universities, and the tech that's being commercialized, the companies that are coming out of these ecosystems, the investors that are investing in them, and sort of what it means to have more sort of widespread adoption of these technologies. And maybe I just go back to kind of where I started, which was, at a company that's primary focus was storytelling. And so I think the stories are important of how people did it. And then, I think that at the end of the day, like, we're all citizens, like, of our communities, of the world. And it is important now more than ever to, encourage, request, demand, right, these types of innovations, this type of access to data at the community level. Like, I need to know about my water. I need to know about the air I breathe. I need to know about the energy that I'm consuming. Like, show up at your local town halls. Like, what you're going to meet is founders like Darren, like founders, like others in our portfolio that are there educating the communities and municipalities about these solutions that they're offering. And so, we have to sort of meet these founders kind of in the middle. And also, we can't be afraid to really take some of these strategies and these sort of ideals into the way that we do business. But sometimes the easiest way to do that is to see or learn from someone else who has done it successfully. And I think that's important as well. So it's probably really, it's communities like these, it's being able to share those stories is incredibly important, because, just like the kids that we were talking about earlier, you have to see it to believe it. And I think that ends up being one of the most impactful strategies.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, Nia, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for inspiring us with some of the great things that you see emerging. And we will definitely want to circle back when there's more of those stories that you can share about inspiring companies and that are starting up in the work that they're doing. Thank you for your work, and thank you for being with us on the Green Stream today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. And, for anyone that's listening in, like, it takes all of us, but, the future is bright. You got to fight for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Business Network Detroit, the Green Stream podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow us on sbn-detroit.org and stay tuned for more conversations on sustainability from inside and around the city.